The chefs mocked her. The audience doubted her. But when the judges took one bite, silence fell. Lily Green was in her kitchen, kneading dough, when the letter arrived. It was a thick envelope embossed with gold lettering, and her name was scrawled in elegant handwriting. She placed her flour-covered hands on the counter and wiped them with a towel before opening it. The letter inside was an invitation to compete in the prestigious National Culinary Challenge, a cooking contest that was broadcast nationwide. Take a second to subscribe. It really helps. Thanks. Now back to the story. She stared at the invitation for several moments, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The contest was a dream for most chefs, but Lily was no professional. She had never worked in a restaurant or taken culinary school classes. Her expertise came from years of cooking for her family in their small town, where the kitchen was her sanctuary, not a stage for competition. Lily glanced around her modest kitchen. The faded yellow walls and chipped cabinets a far cry from the gleaming, high-tech kitchens she imagined the contestants would have. The dishes she made were simple, comfort food, hearty meals made from love and necessity, not gourmet creations. Still, there was something about the invitation that tugged at her. It wasn't just the allure of competition, but the challenge itself, something to prove, not to others, but to herself. Taking a deep breath, she dialed her best friend, Grace, who had always encouraged her to follow her culinary instincts, despite her self-doubt. When Grace picked up, Lily quickly explained the invitation. There was silence on the other end before Grace's excited voice broke through. Lily, this is your chance. You've got something they don't, Hart. You have a way with food that's impossible to fake. This could be the opportunity of a lifetime. Lily hesitated, but then smiled. Maybe it wasn't about competing against chefs with fancy credentials. Maybe it was about proving to herself that her food was worth more than just the comfort of her own kitchen. She felt the stirring of something more, courage. Lily spent the next few days in a whirlwind of doubt and excitement. She had never even been in a professional kitchen, let alone competed in a high-stakes culinary contest. The closest she'd come to cooking in front of others was at the local bake sale, and even then, she had felt a little out of place. But there was no turning back now. She'd accepted the invitation, and now it was time to prepare. The first thing she did was sit down with her mother's old recipe box, a faded wooden container filled with cards scribbled in her mother's handwriting. As she flipped through them, her fingers brushed over the familiar recipes that had always brought comfort to her family. Hearty stews, baked goods, and the warm, inviting dishes that had been her signature for years. But none of these felt like they could stand up to the gourmet dishes she imagined would dominate the competition. She needed something more. Lily decided to stay true to her roots, but with a twist. She'd elevate one of her mother's simple recipes, a savory pot roast, by using high-quality ingredients and adding a few creative touches she had learned from cooking shows over the years. As she mapped out her strategy, her confidence wavered. Would it be enough to impress the judges? Would they mock her for using such a basic dish? The next few days were spent shopping for ingredients. She ventured to the city's high-end markets, each one more intimidating than the last. The gleaming marble floors, the perfect rows of produce, and the impeccably dressed shoppers all felt foreign to her. She searched for the best cuts of meat, the freshest herbs, and the finest vegetables, but with every purchase, she second-guessed her choices. By the time she got home, her arms were full of bags, her mind was full of doubts, and her heart was pounding with nervous anticipation. She set everything on the counter and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, she would start. She would cook like it was any other day, but this time, everything felt different. The day of the contest arrived, and Lily's nerves were a whirlwind. She woke up early, her stomach a knot of anticipation. The city was buzzing, the streets more crowded than usual as the National Culinary Challenge was about to begin. She slipped into her simple black dress and a pair of worn-in shoes, trying to steady her breath as she walked out the door. There was no turning back now. The event was being held in a massive convention center, its polished floors gleaming under the bright lights. The building was filled with the hum of conversation and the sharp scent of fresh ingredients. Lily stepped through the doors, her eyes wide, taking in the grand kitchens set up for each contestant. The other chefs looked at her with polite curiosity, some with raised eyebrows as they assessed her plain appearance. She felt out of place among the well-dressed, sharply dressed professionals, but she pushed that thought aside. This was about the food, not the clothes. As she walked to her designated station, the whispers began. She could hear the other chefs chuckling quietly among themselves, no doubt making bets on how long she would last. One chef, a tall man with a perfectly pressed apron, gave her an exaggerated once-over before snorting and turning away. Lily clenched her jaw and focused on the task ahead. The host took the stage, his booming voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. He announced the first challenge, an appetizer that would set the tone for the entire competition. Lily's heart raced as she mentally rehearsed the dish she had planned, the simple but flavorful pot roast, reimagined into bite-sized portions. As the clock started ticking, she moved quickly but carefully, chopping vegetables, browning the meat, and seasoning it just as she had practiced. The other chefs were working at lightning speed, throwing around complex techniques and high-end gadgets. But Lily kept her pace, trusting in her own methodical approach. She knew it wasn't about doing everything perfectly. It was about making something that mattered. The timer started, and Lily's hands moved with a steady rhythm, cutting and prepping with practiced ease. The kitchen around her buzzed with the frantic energy of more experienced chefs, but she kept her focus. This wasn't a fancy kitchen with state-of-the-art gadgets. It was just a simple knife and a handful of fresh ingredients. The smell of sizzling meat filled the air, and for a brief moment, she felt like she was in her own kitchen at home. She glanced around the room, noting the other chefs' progress. They were working in a blur, pulling out elaborate tools, stirring pots of sauces she didn't recognize, and preparing dishes she couldn't even pronounce. It was overwhelming, but Lily shut out the noise. She had one dish in mind, and that was what she was going to serve. As she assembled the pot roast bites, each piece was neatly cut, and the sauce was rich with the right balance of flavors. She was proud of it, but there was no time to get too attached. The judges were making their way down the line, and Lily's heart pounded in her chest. When they reached her station, the head judge, a renowned celebrity chef with a stern expression, paused. He looked at her simple dish, then up at her. "A pot roast?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Lily nodded, her hand still trembling slightly. "Yes, but it's my take on it. I've reimagined it as an appetizer, adding a few unique flavors to elevate it." He raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything more. The judges took their first bite in unison. The silence in the air was deafening as they chewed, their expressions unreadable. Lily could feel the weight of their gazes on her, waiting for the verdict. Finally, the head judge spoke. This is surprising," he said, his tone softening. "Simple, but well executed. The flavors are rich, and it's clear you put thought into every step." He nodded slightly. "Not what I expected, but it works." Lily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It wasn't a win yet, but it was a start. As the judges moved on to the other stations, Lily felt the sting of the whispers around her. She tried to ignore the murmurs, focusing instead on the task ahead. But every now and then, she caught a glance or overheard a comment, sharp and dismissive. "Did she really just serve a pot roast?" one chef muttered under his breath, barely concealing his laughter. "This is a high-end competition, not a family dinner." Lily kept her head down, chopping vegetables for the next round. She felt the weight of their judgment, but she wasn't about to let it get to her. Still, the sting lingered, and she couldn't help but feel small among the polished, confident chefs around her. One chef, a woman with sharp features and a flawless appearance, leaned toward a colleague and said loud enough for Lily to hear, "I'm surprised she even knows what a whisk is." The man chuckled, but there was a clear edge to their mockery, a suggestion that someone like Lily didn't belong in this world of fine dining. Lily's fingers tightened around the knife, but she forced herself to breathe. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was here to prove to herself that she could do it, that her love for food, her authenticity, and the lessons learned in her small kitchen meant something, even in a place filled with towering egos and Michelin stars. But the sneers didn't stop. As she worked, She could feel the cold stares of the other chefs, their eyes lingering on her every move. She was a curiosity to them, a woman who didn't belong, whose food was too simple, too ordinary for this stage. The competition wasn't just about the food, it was about status, and Lily's status was far from theirs. Still, she kept working, her hands moving with purpose, blocking out the noise. She wasn't going to let their ridicule overshadow her passion. The pot roast had shown them a glimpse of what she could do. She just needed to keep proving it. The judges moved down the line, and the tension in the room grew thicker with each dish they tasted. Lily tried to keep her focus, but the air was heavy with anticipation, and the sound of their footsteps echoed through the kitchen. She worked steadily, keeping her head down and reminding herself that she wasn't here to compete with anyone else but herself. When the head judge finally reached her station, his expression was unreadable as he picked up one of the pot roast bites. He examined it for a moment, turning it over in his hand, then placed it carefully in his mouth. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity as Lily watched him chew. The silence was suffocating. She had no idea what they were thinking, but her heart hammered in her chest, and she couldn't keep her hands from trembling. The other chefs had already begun to serve their dishes, their confident movements betraying none of the anxiety that knotted in her stomach. Finally, the judge set the empty plate down and looked at Lily, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "This is unexpected," he said, his voice steady. "A simple dish, but it has layers of flavor I wasn't expecting." Lily's breath caught in her throat, and she struggled to hide her surprise. She hadn't expected such a compliment. The other judges were now tasting, and the room was quiet again. She saw one of them nod approvingly, while another furrowed his brow, taking another bite to be sure. The head judge turned back to her, this time with a small, approving smile. "You've done something impressive with this," he said. "The flavors are robust, and you've kept it elegant despite the simplicity. It's honest. There's no pretense, just good food." The tension in Lily's chest began to release. For the first time in the competition, she felt a flicker of pride. She had done it. She had proven that simplicity could speak volumes, that good cooking didn't need to be complicated or flashy. It just needed heart. As the competition continued, Lily noticed something unexpected. While the other chefs continued to eye her with skepticism, there was one who seemed to take a particular interest in her cooking. Maya, a sharp, experienced chef with a reputation for being a perfectionist, had watched Lily's progress with a mix of curiosity and, to Lily's surprise, something close to respect. During the lunch break, as the contestants gathered around the common area, Maya approached Lily's station. The young woman felt a knot form in her stomach. Maya's presence alone was intimidating, but what came next was even more unexpected. "That pot roast," Maya began, her tone guarded but not dismissive. "It wasn't what I expected. I thought it'd be a disaster. But you actually pulled off." Lily's eyes widened, unsure she had heard correctly. Thanks. I didn't want to overcomplicate it, you know." Maya gave a slight nod, her arms crossed as she surveyed the kitchen. "I can tell. You're not trying to be flashy. You're just cooking food that means something to you." Lily felt a flush of warmth rise to her cheeks, unsure how to respond. "I guess it's just what I've always done," she said, shrugging. "Simple meals, the ones that feel like home." Maya smiled, a rare softening of her usual stern expression. "That's the trick. Don't let the competition fool you into thinking you need to impress with tricks. Food should always be about the taste, not the presentation." The words hit Lily like a revelation. She had been so focused on worrying about how her food would be perceived that she had forgotten the most important thing. It had to come from her heart. Maya gave her one last look before heading off to prepare for the next round. "Keep doing what you're doing," she called back, offering a brief but genuine nod of approval. "You've got something they don't." For the first time, Lily felt a surge of confidence. It wasn't just about winning. It was about staying true to herself, no matter what the others thought. As the competition entered its second day, Lily felt a shift in the atmosphere. The other chefs, who had once sneered at her humble dishes, began to notice something that they hadn't before. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't trying to be anything other than herself. The pot roast had been a turning point, but it was the next round that would really test her. Maya, the sharp, no-nonsense chef, continued to watch Lily from the sidelines, but this time there was something different about her gaze. It wasn't as cold or judgmental as before. It was focused, almost like she was studying Lily's every move. Lily tried to ignore it, but it made her increasingly self-conscious. The next challenge was a sophisticated 5-course meal. The chefs moved swiftly, preparing their menus with precision and flair, while Lily stood at her station, feeling the weight of the moment. She had no fancy techniques to fall back on, no Michelin star tricks to impress the judges. She was only armed with what she knew, hearty, familiar food that didn't rely on gimmicks. As she worked, Maya approached her, this time with a look that was neither condescending nor dismissive. "You're not using the right technique for your sauce," she said bluntly, peering over Lily's shoulder. "It'll break if you don't adjust the temperature." Lily's first instinct was to brush her off, but she remembered Maya's words from the day before. "Don't let the competition fool you." Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Thanks. I'll try that." Maya didn't leave, though. She stayed close by, offering tips and suggestions in an unexpected, guarded way. "You're using too much salt for the garnish. Add it in stages." It wasn't the warmest of interactions, but it was help all the same. Lily's pride had kept her from asking for assistance, but in this competition, she realized it wasn't about pride. It was about learning, growing, and doing her best. Maya's support was unexpected, but it was the push Lily needed to move past her doubts and embrace the help offered to her, no matter how reluctantly given. The second challenge was announced with an air of anticipation. The contestants were given the task of creating a gourmet entree, one that would showcase their culinary skills and creativity. Lily felt her pulse quicken as the clock began to tick. This was her moment to step out of her comfort zone, to prove that she wasn't just a cook from a small town, but someone capable of competing on this stage. She surveyed the ingredients in front of her, unsure of what to do at first. The pressure was building. The chefs around her were moving with impressive speed, pulling out unusual ingredients and exotic spices. The sophisticated flavors they created seemed worlds away from the home-cooked meals she knew. But then, Lily took a breath and thought of her family. She remembered the slow-cooked meals her mother had made, rich with love and care. She decided to combine what she knew with a little innovation, to make something truly her own. Lily selected a tender cut of lamb, seasoned with fresh herbs and a touch of garlic. She planned to pair it with a creamy, truffle-infused risotto and roasted root vegetables, all tied together with a rich reduction. It was simple, but it had depth. As she worked, she noticed Maya watching her from across the room. Lily felt a bit of self-doubt creeping in. Was her dish too simple for the judges? Would they dismiss it as another basic attempt? But then she reminded herself that it wasn't about complexity, it was about making the ingredients shine. Time ticked away, and Lily found herself moving with increasing confidence. Her lamb roasted to a perfect golden brown, the risotto creamy without being heavy, the vegetables perfectly tender. As she plated the dish, she felt a surge of pride. She wasn't just cooking for the judges. She was cooking for herself, for the joy of creating something meaningful. When the judges finally arrived at her station, they didn't immediately comment. Instead, they tasted, their expressions neutral at first. Lily waited, holding her breath. Would they see the care she had put into the dish, or would it fall flat? The judges moved on to the next station, and Lily's heart raced. Her entree had been well received, but there was still so much to prove. The competition was fierce, and she couldn't afford to stumble now. But as the day wore on, the difficulty of balancing innovation with tradition became increasingly apparent. Lily had always prided herself on her ability to follow recipes, to craft dishes with care and precision. But now she was faced with something different. She needed to innovate. The pressure to be unique, to stand out, weighed heavily on her. The other chefs were taking bold risks, experimenting with avant-garde techniques and unusual flavor combinations, while she felt rooted in the comfort of her traditional methods. Her next dish was meant to be a creative twist on an old favorite, a dessert inspired by her grandmother's apple pie. But as she began, she found herself struggling to break from the familiar. She wanted to do something different, something unexpected, but every time she reached for a new idea, it felt forced, as if she was trying too hard. Her first attempt at a caramel sauce ended in disaster, the sugar seizing up and burning before she could even finish. Frustration began to mount. She had wanted to incorporate a modern touch to the dessert, a delicate, infused cream, but the execution wasn't coming together. Her hands trembled as she whisked the cream, watching it curdle before her eyes. She glanced around at the other chefs. They were moving with practiced precision, creating intricate plating, experimenting with molecular gastronomy, and presenting dishes that looked like works of art. Meanwhile, Lily's dessert was beginning to feel like a mess. A deep breath. She had to stop thinking about what she was supposed to do and focus on what felt right. She abandoned the complex garnish she had planned and decided to go back to the basics: warm, spiced apples, flaky pastry, and a touch of caramel. Simple, real. As the clock ticked down, Lily pulled the dish together, plating it with care. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was hers. She had stayed true to the essence of what made her food special. No gimmicks, just heart. As the judges made their rounds, Lily stood back, watching them with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The dessert she had created, a simple apple tart, wasn't the flashiest dish in the competition. She had chosen to forego elaborate garnishes and complex plating, instead focusing on the flavors, the textures, and the essence of what made the dessert comforting and timeless. When the judges arrived at her station, they took a long look at the dessert before them, the caramelized apples glistening under the soft lighting. The head judge raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking from the tart to Lily and then to his fellow panelists. "This doesn't exactly scream innovation," he said, his tone bordering on dismissive. Lily felt a surge of self-doubt, but she held her ground. "It's not about being flashy," she said quietly. "It's about the flavors. This is a family recipe passed down through generations. I want to showcase the simplicity of it." The judge didn't respond immediately, instead cutting into the tart and taking a bite. The room seemed to hold its breath as the other judges followed suit, their forks moving in sync. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, and Lily tried to steady her nerves. She knew her dish was good, but would they see it for what it was? Finally, the head judge spoke again, this time with a softer tone. "The balance of sweetness and spice is surprisingly well executed. The crust is delicate, and the caramelization adds depth without overwhelming the apple." He paused, looking at Lily. "I must admit, I didn't expect to be this impressed by something so simple." Lily allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Her dish had been underestimated, but it had proven itself. The judges hadn't expected much from a humble apple tart, but it was exactly what they needed: comforting, honest, and full of flavor. For the first time in the competition, Lily felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The room fell silent as the judges continued tasting, their expressions unreadable. The other chefs bustled around, busy with their own dishes, but Lily stood still, her heart thudding in her chest. The weight of their scrutiny pressed on her like an invisible force. She had put everything into this dish, into every step, every decision. But now, as the judges finished sampling, she felt exposed, vulnerable. The head judge, a well-known chef with a reputation for his blunt critiques, placed his fork down carefully. His eyes locked onto Lily's, his gaze steady, almost calculating. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. She could feel the anticipation growing in the room, the other contestants pausing to watch the verdict unfold. For a long moment, the judge said nothing. Lily's mind raced, and she fought to keep her composure. Had she failed? Was her dish too simple for them to appreciate? The other contestants, who had spent their time meticulously crafting elaborate dishes, were probably wondering the same thing. Was there any chance her simple, humble dessert could stand a chance against their complex creations? Finally, the judge broke the silence. "I didn't expect to be moved by something so straightforward," he said, his voice low but firm. "But this tart, this dessert, there's something here. Something honest. It's not pretending to be something it's not. Lily felt her breath catch. He continued, the apples are perfectly cooked, the flavor is balanced, and the crust, it's like a memory. This isn't just food, it's a feeling. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Lily couldn't respond. It wasn't just praise, it was validation. They had tasted something more than just ingredients. They had tasted her heart. As the judge moved on to the next station, Lily stood there, the weight lifting off her shoulders. The quiet hum of the competition resumed, but she felt different. She had done more than survive the contest. She had connected with them, through food, through simplicity, through honesty. As the competition progressed, the tension in the room seemed to rise with every passing moment. The first few days had been filled with nervous energy, but now it was different. The air was thick with anticipation, and every move was watched, calculated. Lily had begun to feel the weight of the competition, not just from the judges, but from her fellow chefs, too. The other contestants, once dismissive of her simple approach, now treated her with wary respect. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that she wasn't just a small-town cook stumbling through the competition. She had proven herself, and now they saw her as a real contender. But with that respect came a new kind of pressure. The more they acknowledged her, the more she had to prove. In the kitchen, the sound of knives chopping, pots clanging, and timers ticking felt amplified. The chefs around her were working faster, more focused, but there was an edge to their movements, something sharper, more competitive. They weren't just preparing dishes, they were preparing to take each other down. Lily felt it too. The desire to win, to prove that she belonged, was stronger than ever. But as the next challenge began, a creeping doubt set in. She had made it this far with her homegrown dishes, her simple, heartwarming food. But was it enough to continue? She wasn't playing the same game as the other chefs. They were working with techniques she didn't fully understand, using ingredients that were as foreign to her as the fancy gadgets they wielded. As the timer started for the next round, she felt the pressure of every glance, every whisper from the other contestants. They were no longer just mocking her. They were sizing her up. And Lily knew that for the first time, the stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just about cooking anymore. It was about proving she was capable of stepping into a world she had never been part of and showing them that her way, her simple, honest cooking, was worthy of recognition. Lily stood at her station, the scent of sizzling vegetables and freshly chopped herbs filling the air, but her mind was elsewhere. The competition was getting fiercer, and the other chefs were stepping up their game with precision, flair, and gadgets that seemed like something out of a high-tech kitchen. She had done well so far, but something felt missing. She needed something to set her apart, something that would make her dishes unforgettable. Her eyes drifted to the corner of her station, where the small bottle of her mother's homemade spice blend sat. It was a family recipe passed down from her grandmother, something no one outside her home had ever tasted. It wasn't fancy, but it was unique. It had the power to transform simple dishes into something extraordinary. The blend was a secret, one that Lily had never shared with anyone, not even her best friend, Grace. It was the essence of her home, the memory of her family's meals, and the love that had always been present in their kitchen. The idea came to her in a flash. What if she added just a pinch of this secret ingredient to her next dish? She could elevate her flavors without overcomplicating things, without resorting to tricks or techniques she wasn't familiar with. It wasn't about standing out with a gimmick. It was about staying true to what she knew best. She reached for the bottle, her hand steady as she carefully measured out just a small amount of the spice blend. A pinch, enough to enhance the flavor of her dish, not overpower it. As she stirred it into her sauce, a wave of warmth spread through her. She could almost hear her mother's voice in the back of her mind, telling her that good food didn't need to be complicated. It just needed to be made with love. Lily tasted the sauce, her heart racing. It was perfect, rich, complex, and yet familiar. She smiled to herself. She didn't need to play the same game as the others. She just needed to cook with her heart, and that secret ingredient would make all the difference. The final challenge was announced with a flare of excitement that buzzed through the entire room. This was it, the last round, the culmination of everything. The chefs gathered around, their eyes sharp and focused, already planning their moves. Lily felt a familiar knot form in her stomach, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was determination. The task was deceptively simple. Create a dish that encapsulated everything they had learned throughout the competition. There were no rules, no constraints, just a freedom to cook from the heart. The judges wanted to see the essence of each chef's style, their unique approach to food. Lily took a deep breath, pushing past the panic that tried to creep in. She knew this was her moment to prove not just her skills, but who she was as a cook. She didn't need to overcomplicate things. She didn't need to impress with exotic ingredients or outlandish techniques. All she had to do was cook from the place she knew best, from her roots, from her family's table. Her mind quickly went to her mother's old recipes, the ones she had grown up on, the dishes that had always brought people together. She decided on a dish that had been a staple at every family gathering. Her grandmother's stuffed chicken, with a stuffing made of herbs, wild rice, and a hint of her secret spice blend. It wasn't the most extravagant dish, but it was rich with memory, with tradition, with love. The kitchen became a blur as she worked, her hands moving with practiced precision. As the chicken roasted in the oven, the smell of warm herbs and roasting vegetables filled the space around her. It was a comforting, familiar scent, one that made her feel grounded despite the chaos of the competition around her. With the dish plated and garnished with a light drizzle of her secret sauce, Lily stepped back. She looked at it, a feeling of quiet pride swelling within her. It wasn't about the complexity or the flair of the dish. It was about making something real, something that told a story. She wasn't trying to impress anymore. She was simply cooking from the heart. The clock was ticking down, and Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. The final dish was nearly done, just a few final touches to make before the judges arrived. But as she glanced at the oven, a sinking feeling hit her. The chicken wasn't cooking fast enough. She opened the oven door, hoping to see a perfectly golden roast, but instead, she found something far worse. The chicken, despite her careful attention, was undercooked. The skin hadn't crisped as it should have, and the stuffing inside was still raw. Panic surged through her, and for the first time in the competition, she felt completely out of control. Her mind raced. She had no time to start over. The judges would be here any minute, and she couldn't afford to send out an incomplete dish. She frantically checked the clock. 5 minutes left. 5 minutes to fix this disaster. With trembling hands, she grabbed the chicken and quickly moved it to a hotter section of the oven. The stuffing wasn't as cooked as she wanted either. She tried to salvage it by putting it on the stovetop, hoping the heat would give it the final push it needed. But everything felt rushed, everything felt wrong. Lily's breath quickened as she wiped sweat from her brow. She could hear the voices of the other chefs in the background, moving with ease, focused on their dishes. She could hear the hum of their success, while she fought with this last-minute disaster. She opened the oven door again. The chicken was starting to crisp, but the stuffing still undercooked. Her heart sank. She could feel the panic clawing at her. But then, a strange calmness washed over her. There was no time left for doubt. She had to go with what she had. When the judges finally arrived at her station, she stood tall, despite her racing heart. She could only hope that the flavors would speak louder than the frantic, rushed preparation. She placed the dish in front of them, hoping the love she had poured into it would be enough to mask the chaos that had nearly ruined it. As the judges took their first bites, Lily stood with bated breath, watching them closely. The moments that followed felt like an eternity. She could hear the soft clinking of forks and knives, but everything else was drowned out by the pounding in her chest. The chicken wasn't perfect, but it was cooked through. The stuffing had come together better than expected, despite the rushed preparation. She had done her best, but now it was out of her hands. The head judge set down his fork, his expression unreadable. Lily's stomach tightened, but she refused to break eye contact. His gaze lingered on the plate before him, and for a moment, she thought he might say something cutting, something that would shatter all her work. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "You've turned this around," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This could have easily been a disaster, but you've managed to pull it off. The chicken is cooked perfectly, the stuffing is flavorful, and the sauce ties it all together." Lily exhaled in relief. It wasn't a grand compliment, but it was enough. She had been afraid that her last-minute panic would overshadow everything. But somehow, despite the chaos, her dish had made it through. The other judges took their time, savoring the dish, nodding to each other. The silence stretched on, but this time, it wasn't filled with uncertainty. They were considering, reflecting, taking in the dish for what it was: authentic, grounded, and full of warmth. Finally, the head judge turned to her again. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is what good food is about. It's about understanding the ingredients, respecting the process, and not losing yourself in the chaos of the kitchen." He paused. "You've redeemed this dish." Lily's heart swelled with pride. She had done it. She had taken a last-minute disaster and turned it into something that spoke to the judges, not just with skill, but with heart. She hadn't won yet, but for the first time, she felt like she belonged here. She had earned her place in this competition. The judges continued to sample the dishes, their faces a study of concentration. Lily stood off to the side, watching as they moved through the other contestants' plates, their expressions unreadable. She felt a tension building inside her, a mixture of nerves and anticipation. She had fought hard to stay true to herself, to her cooking, but the reality of the competition was sinking in. She wasn't just up against the other chef's talent. She was up against their expectations of what cooking should be. Then, as the judges reached her station, the atmosphere shifted. The head judge, who had been nothing but stern since the beginning, took a bite of her dish. His face remained neutral, but the subtle narrowing of his eyes caught her attention. He took another bite, then passed the plate to his colleagues. For a moment, there was complete silence, and Lily's heart raced as she watched them. She couldn't read their expressions. Her stomach churned. It was as if the air had thickened, and the weight of the room fell squarely on her shoulders. The head judge looked up from a plate, his brows furrowed, but his lips parted in an unmistakable expression of surprise. He stopped himself, unsure of how to continue. "This is extraordinary. I didn't expect this from you." He turned to his colleagues, looking for confirmation. The other judges exchanged glances, clearly taken aback. One of them leaned forward, wiping his mouth, then spoke up. "The flavors, there's a depth to this. You took something so simple, and you've made it exceptional. It's unexpected." He paused, clearly impressed. This is a dish that tells a story. A real story." Lily blinked, her heart skipping a beat. She had expected the judges to acknowledge the effort, but this was something entirely different. Their shock wasn't just surprise, it was genuine admiration. For the first time in the competition, she saw a flicker of something beyond mere evaluation. They were moved, and Lily knew, without a doubt, that she had finally earned their respect. The final moments of the competition had arrived, and the room seemed to pulse with energy. Lily stood among the remaining chefs, her mind spinning with thoughts of the last few days. She had worked tirelessly, given everything she had, but the outcome was still uncertain. The judges had been impressed, but that was no guarantee. As the head judge stepped forward to announce the final verdict, Lily's breath caught in her throat. The other contestants were all standing with their heads high, confident in their abilities. They were used to the spotlight, accustomed to accolades and attention. Lily, on the other hand, had spent most of her life in the background, unnoticed and undervalued. But now, for the first time, she was standing at the center of something larger than herself. The room fell silent. The host's voice rang out, sharp and clear, as he recapped the final dishes and the moments that had led them here. Lily's mind flashed back to her grandmother's kitchen, the hours spent cooking with her mother, the lessons learned at the family table. Every dish she had prepared in this competition, from the pot roast to the apple tart, had come from that place. The head judge stepped up to the microphone, his eyes sweeping the room. "We've tasted many incredible dishes over the last few days," he said, pausing for a dramatic beat. But only one dish truly stood out. One dish that captured the essence of what good food is all about: heart, flavor, and authenticity. Lily's heart stopped. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The words hung in the air like a dream, something she couldn't quite grasp. "In that dish," the head judge continued, turning toward her with a small but knowing smile, "was yours." Time seemed to slow as the realization hit. Her dish, her humble, honest dish, had won. She had done it. The cheers around her were distant at first, muffled by the rush of emotion that flooded her. But then they grew louder, and Lily allowed herself a smile, a small, quiet victory. She had come here as an underdog, and now she stood as the champion. The room was still, the air thick with expectation. The host stood at the front, his voice steady as he recapped the competition's highs and lows. Lily felt her heart thundering in her chest, every beat a drum of anxiety and hope. The time had come. The judges had tasted, deliberated, and now the moment that would define her journey was at hand. "Thank you all for your incredible work over the past few days," the host said, his words carrying the weight of the competition's culmination. "You've each shown talent, passion, and creativity. But now it's time to announce the winner, the one dish that stood out above the rest." Lily's stomach flipped. She could hear the rustle of the audience, the collective breath being held. She glanced over at the other contestants, their faces a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Some were smiling confidently. Others seemed to be bracing themselves for whatever came next. And then there was Lily, standing in the middle of it all, her thoughts spinning. The head judge stepped forward, his expression serious yet thoughtful. "We've seen many exceptional dishes, but there was one that encapsulated everything we hoped to see, a dish that wasn't just about technique, but about heart, about soul." Lily could feel the weight of his gaze as he paused, drawing the moment out, letting the tension build. Her hands clenched at her sides, her breath shallow. "And the winner," the judge continued, his voice steady but laced with an undeniable hint of admiration, "is Lily Green." The words landed like a bolt of lightning. Her mind struggled to catch up, to process what had just been said. Her name, her simple name, her simple dish had won. The applause started slowly, hesitant at first, but it grew, building into a roar that echoed through the room. She blinked, stunned, her legs shaking as she made her way to the front. As the host placed the winner's trophy into her hands, Lily looked out at the crowd, overwhelmed with emotion. She had done it. Not just won a contest, but proven to herself and everyone else that authenticity, heart, and love for food could triumph in the most unexpected of places. Lily stood at the front of the stage, the trophy warm in her hands, its weight grounding her in the moment. The applause still echoed in her ears, a whirlwind of excitement and validation. She had won. It felt unreal, like something out of a dream. She had come from a small town, a home cook with no professional training, and now, here she was, holding a trophy that symbolized everything she had worked for. The host stepped aside, giving her the floor, and the crowd quieted, eager to hear her words. Her heart raced as she stepped up to the microphone. The spotlight was blinding, but she forced herself to meet the eyes of the audience. They weren't just judges and fellow chefs anymore. They were people who had seen her, heard her, and now respected her. She cleared her throat, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. I don't really know where to start," she began, her voice soft but steady. This means more than I can say. When I first got that invitation, I thought it was a mistake. I thought, who am I to compete with chefs who've spent their lives honing their skills?" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But what I've learned, what I've truly realized, is that cooking isn't about how many years you've spent training or the fancy techniques you know. It's about the heart you put into it, the love that goes into every dish. For me, it's always been about family, about feeding people and making them feel at home." Lily looked down at the trophy, then back up at the audience. "I came into this competition thinking I was just trying to prove something to myself. But what I've learned is that good food, the kind that touches people, comes from being true to who you are. I'm just a cook from a small town, But today, I've learned that's enough. The crowd was silent for a moment, and then a wave of applause broke out once again. Lily smiled, humbled, overwhelmed, and filled with gratitude. She had not only won a competition, she had found her place. The days following the competition were a blur of media interviews, photo shoots, and an overwhelming surge of attention that Lily hadn't quite anticipated. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, congratulations, questions, offers. The world had taken notice of her victory, and while she was grateful, she couldn't help but feel like it was all happening too fast. Her small town was abuzz with excitement. People from every corner of the community called, congratulated her, and shared their pride. It was humbling, in a way, but also surreal. Lily had never imagined that winning a cooking competition would lead to this kind of attention. Her simple, home-cooked dishes had made it into the spotlight, and now she was suddenly expected to step into a new world of culinary fame. But amidst the whirlwind, there was a quiet, constant presence in her mind, the kitchen at home. The place where her passion had first begun, where food wasn't about perfection or innovation, but about connection and love. As she sat in the studio for another interview, smiling through the questions about her future plans and the upcoming cookbook deals, she felt a pang of longing for the simplicity of those early days. One afternoon, as she walked through the market near her home, a familiar face stopped her. It was Grace, her best friend, and Lily couldn't help but laugh as Grace wrapped her in a tight hug. "You did it," Grace said, grinning. "You really did it." Lily smiled, her exhaustion lifting for a moment. "I did, but I think I need a break. I need to cook something without the cameras, without the pressure. Just something for the people I care about." Grace nodded. "You've earned that." As the days went on, Lily found herself retreating back to her roots. She spent quiet evenings in her own kitchen, cooking for friends and family, not to impress, but to connect. She realized then that no matter where life took her, she would always carry the same love for food that had started it all. And that, in the end, was enough. After weeks of interviews and public appearances, Lily finally made her way back home. The city had swallowed her whole, with its bright lights and endless bustle. But as she drove the familiar roads back to her small town, a wave of relief washed over her. Here, she could breathe. Here, she was just Lily, the cook, the daughter, the friend, not the winner of a national competition. As she turned onto the quiet street that led to her house, she saw a group of neighbors standing outside their homes, waving as she passed. Word had spread, of course, about her victory. The local diner had even put up a sign that read, "Congratulations, Lily, our local champion." The warmth in the gestures, the pride in their eyes, it was more meaningful than anything she'd experienced in the glare of the spotlight. She parked in front of her small cottage, the one she'd grown up in, its garden now overgrown with wildflowers. The front door creaked open as she stepped inside, greeted by the comforting scent of old wood and the faint trace of spices from her last cooking session. Nothing had changed. It was just as she had left it, simple, peaceful, and familiar. Lily placed her trophy on the kitchen counter, staring at it for a moment before shaking her head. She didn't need this to validate her. She had already proved everything she needed to prove. What mattered most was this space, the place where she first learned to cook, where her mother had taught her how to season with love, where her grandmother's voice still echoed in every corner. That evening, Lily returned to her roots. She chopped vegetables, sautéed onions, and stirred a pot of soup. There were no cameras, no competition, just the sound of a knife hitting the cutting board and the warmth of a meal being prepared. As the sun set outside, she knew she was home. The world may have changed for her, but this, the kitchen, the love of good food, the simplicity, would always remain. And for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed Lily's return home felt like a quiet reprieve from the whirlwind of competition. Yet even in the calm, the impact of her victory was impossible to ignore. News of her win had spread far beyond the small town, and it seemed like everyone knew her name. People came to her not only for cooking tips, but also to share their stories of how her food had reminded them of their own family traditions, their own connections to the past. It wasn't just about her cooking anymore. It was about something deeper, something intangible. Lily had unknowingly tapped into a universal desire for connection, for something real in a world full of distractions. Her simple approach, her authenticity, had resonated with so many people. She became a symbol, not of fame, but of staying true to yourself, even when the world tries to tell you that you're not enough. One afternoon, while volunteering at a local community center to teach kids how to cook, she was approached by a woman who had been watching her from the sidelines. The woman, in her late 40s, had tears in her eyes as she spoke. "Your win, your story, it gave me the courage to follow my own dreams. I've always wanted to open a bakery, but I was too scared. After seeing what you did, I realized that I don't need to have years of culinary school behind me. I just need to start." Lily blinked, unsure what to say. The woman's words hit her in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about food. It was about inspiring others to believe in themselves, to take risks, and to embrace their own paths. That night, as she sat at her kitchen table, reflecting on the day, Lily realized that the impact of her victory was more than just the recognition she had received. It was about sparking something in others, about showing them that they too could achieve greatness, not by pretending to be someone they weren't, but by embracing who they truly were. And that, she thought, was the greatest gift of all. As the months passed, Lily's life slowly returned to a new normal. She had done what she never thought possible, won a national competition, and now she found herself with opportunities she had once only dreamed of. But amid the buzz of interviews, cookbook offers, and new ventures, she kept returning to the same thought. What did success truly mean to her? Her trophy still sat on the kitchen counter, but it no longer symbolized the competition she had won. Instead, it represented the journey, the challenges, the lessons, and the people who had supported her along the way. What mattered now was not the title she'd earned, but the impact she could have on others. She had proven to herself that authenticity and passion could shine through, even in the world of high-end cuisine. One evening, as Lily prepared another simple meal in her humble kitchen, she thought about the people she had met through this journey. The community members who had shared their own stories of struggle and triumph. The woman who had opened her bakery after hearing Lily's story. She realized that the real victory wasn't the fame or recognition. It was the way her food had inspired others to believe in themselves. Lily made a decision. She would continue to teach, not just in classes or on television, but by opening a small culinary center. A place where people could come together, learn to cook with heart, and rediscover the joy of simple, authentic food. She envisioned it as a space where people could connect, not just over recipes, but over shared experiences, where food would bring them closer, just as it had done for her. As the center slowly took shape, Lily knew she was building more than just a business. She was creating a legacy of community, of inspiration, and of the belief that good food was a reflection of the love and care that went into it. And that, more than any award or title, was the gift she wanted to leave behind. Lily smiled as she stirred the pot in front of her, realizing that her real work was just beginning.